Good evening, guys. Tonight we're going to be moving from the Middle Ages to the Renaissance. Please make sure you have your study guides ready. You should have already completed 1 through 14, which is Chapter 19, Section 1. Make sure that you're checking your answers and getting the correct answers down in your ISNs because this is the information that you will be tested on. Okay. Remember, the Middle Ages was considered the Dark Ages during the Crusades and the Black Death. People were not interested in learning because they were so focused on survival. Well, this changes a little bit after the Crusades and the Black Death when Marco Polo goes to China and learns about lots of Chinese culture and products. When he comes back, the word starts spreading about what he learns from a book he wrote, and trade increases. People are interested in those Asian goods and want to trade with Asia. We know that increased trade means money, especially in Italy because a lot of Italy was in a good location, so a lot of Italian merchants made lots of money. One wealthy family in Italy, Florence, Italy, were the Medici family. They were a banking family and patrons of the arts. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. But because of wealth, people are able to focus now again on education and art. This term, that leads us to the Renaissance, and this term, the Renaissance means rebirth. And that's a rebirth in art and learning. In the bottom chart, we'll see down here, Greeks and Romans, Dark Ages and Rebirth. Remember back when we talked about the Greeks and Romans and education was extremely important to them, but not so much during the Middle Ages, the Dark Ages. 95% of people were illiterate, meaning they couldn't read. During the Renaissance, there was a time of rebirth, meaning that people were a rebirth of art and learning, and people were especially interested in the ancient Greeks and Romans, so they'll be coming back up again. Alright, origin story. Remember, origin means the beginning. What are we talking about? The Renaissance. When was this time period? About 1350 to 1550. It started in Italy, more specifically Florence, Milan, Venice, especially Florence. Over here in the top right hand corner, this is a picture of Florence, Italy. Why Italy? Well, because of trade. Italy was in a great location along the Mediterranean Sea, in the middle of Europe, also close to North Africa and Islamic nations, and so it is a great location and trade increases there. And then who helps wealth increase in Florence, Italy are the Medici family. They were patrons of the arts. That means that they would give money to artists in exchange for the art. They also helped increase education because they were a banking family. They wanted educated people to work in their banks. So they helped supply a lot of jobs. And I forgot my train of thought. Anyway, we'll come back to them later in your study guide. Okay, study guide number 1. Ask about Marco Polo. Marco Polo. He was a trader from Venice, Italy. He went to China and ends up staying there for a while and working with the great Kublai Khan and learning lots about their culture. He returns to Venice, Italy 20 years later, and someone helped him write a book about his experiences in China. And that book actually sold in great numbers. And when that book sells, trade increases because people became so interested in Asian goods after reading that book. We've seen trade increase all within Europe and along the Mediterranean Sea a lot, but not between Asia and Europe. I'm doing hand motions. You can't see that, so I guess that's not helping you. But in between Asia and Europe. And I want you to kind of bookmark that in your brain because that will come up again in later chapters, especially wanting to trade for Asian spices and silks. Italian cities started going quickly because a lot of the merchants were from Italy. 4 major trade cities in Italy. One is Venice. It is a city on the water. You can see this picture in the top right-hand corner. They still have major glass blowing shops there. I've gotten a lot of glass jewelry from Venice when I went. It's beautiful and very interesting. We have Milan over here. They were manufacturing weapons and silk, and now it's a fashion capital of the world. Florence, Italy is here. You can see the bridges that go along the water. And then Genoa in the bottom right-hand corner. Also a port city along the water. Here's a picture of Florence, Italy. This is the Duomo. It's a big church that's, the pictures don't do it justice. When you get up close to it, it's almost teal. It's so beautiful. It's amazing. All right, number 4. Remember the word diffusion we talked about at the beginning of the year. It means to spread. Well, when Asia and China, China is in Asia. When Asia and Europe start trading with each other, more than just goods are traded. Also, ideas and awareness is spread across the whole world at this time. Remember to pause if you need any extra time with any one question. All right, the Medici family, study guide number 5. The Medicis, you can put your hand in the air like an Italian chef you may see on TV, but they were a family in Florence, Italy. They helped Florence, Italy become wealthy because of their banking and like I said earlier, their interest in having educated workers at their banks. So they built schools and helped educate people so that they could have people who could do math and read and that kind of thing to work in their banks. But also they were patrons of the arts and supported artists by giving them money and allowing Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo to make all these wonderful pieces of art that you see in the hanging in the foyer of our school and some of the pictures that you saw in last night's presentation. Study guide number 7. As you well know, trade made merchants and cities wealthy. Wealthy merchants and bankers spent money, specifically on art and education during this time. A lot of the time, rich families tried to outdo each other, saying, hey, I support the arts more than you do, or I support education more than you do, and they would give bigger and bigger amounts of money to these causes. Renaissance does mean rebirth. The 2 big important factors during the Renaissance were the love of art and the love of education. It is the period following the Dark Ages when learning, art, and education were exploding onto the scene, and they specifically wanted to revisit the ancient Greeks and Romans. During the Middle Ages, most thinkers were devoted to religion. Remember, we said that everything was focused on the church. All life centered around the church. I'm going to have to pause because Breeze is getting into something. No, sir. Okay, I'm back. Well, During the Renaissance, in the 1300s, other things besides religion started to be added to the picture, like poetry, history, art, Greek, and Latin. So when you add all of these things together, they're called humanities. One of your vocab words is humanism, and this is when people are focused on human activities and not just religious world or religious studies. Um, like Leonardo da Vinci, scientist, inventor, not just a religious thinker. A lot of his art and may be religious because the people supporting him, his patrons, asked him to do religious type work. Okay, number 10. In the 1300s, the Turks, we've talked lots about them, had conquered much of the Byzantine Empire. Remember, that's the eastern half of Europe. Scholars seeking to escape the Turks fled to Italy and carried a lot of the ancient text with them. Greece is in that eastern half, so a lot of the Greeks carried ancient Greek pieces of text from those philosophers we learned about. Renaissance artists and architects were drawn to those ancient Greeks and Romans, specifically the art. Well, obviously the artists and architects would be drawn to the art, but you know how we talked about Greeks invented the columns, and their statues were extremely lifelike in detail, and the Romans had the arches and the domes. Well, people in the Renaissance improved on those things. The ancient ruins of these places were still standing, so Renaissance artists and architects were inspired by those ruins. Okay. Remember the height of Greece and Rome was called the classical culture? That's what study guide number 12 is referring to. As scholars rediscovered the glory of classical Greece and Rome, they longed for a renewal of this culture. For number 13, it's basically going through those artists again that we did last night. So you can refer back to the vocabulary portion from last night. You can refer back to your notes. Here, this picture is showing the ceiling, or showing the Sistine Chapel. You can notice the works of art on the ceiling and the walls. It was done by Michelangelo. He was a magnificent sculptor and painter. He considered himself more of a sculptor, but I mean, if you look at the paintings, it's hard to, imagine anything else. He also sculpted the David, the Moses, and the Pieta that you saw last night. Michelangelo also helped with St. Peter's Basilica. It is in the Vatican City in Rome, where the Pope is. Here is parts of Michelangelo's David. What I like about this is the detail. I mean, he is sculpting this, and you can see the curls in David's hair and the veins in his hand, and the muscles and ribs in his chest is just remarkable if you think about it. When I saw David, when I visited Florence, Italy, his hand was about the size of my head. That gives you any perspective. Over here is Michelangelo's Pieta, Mary holding Jesus' lifeless body, and Moses. And finally, study guide number 14. There were two parts. The Renaissance was a rebirth or revival of interest in learning, and it was a rebirth of interest in education in art, literature, and architecture, especially ancient Greek and Roman works of art. That is where we'll stop tonight. Please rewind or pause at any point if you need to get any more study guide answers. Good night.